Nobody in that dining room was ready for what happened that Sunday evening. Not Marcus. Not the woman standing beside him with her hand resting gently on her swollen belly. Not the family gathered around the long oak table, their wine glasses half full, their smiles slowly fading. As the front door opened and a stranger walked in where only a wife was expected, and certainly not Danielle. She had been sitting quietly at the head of the table, smoothing the white linen napkin across her lap, watching the flicker of candles reflect off the crystal glasses. The roast was in the oven. The salad was dressed. Everything had been arranged just so, the way Danielle always arranged things, with care, with intention, and with a purpose that only she fully understood. The evening had started the way most family dinners did in the Carter household. Danielle's mother-in-law, Dorothy, had arrived first, her silver hair pinned neatly at her neck. Bringing a sweet potato casserole she set on the counter without being asked. Marcus's father, Ronald, followed close behind, already loosening his tie before he even reached the porch steps. A couple of cousins and an aunt rounded out the group, filling the house with the particular kind of noise that only comes from people who have known each other for decades. Comfortable, layered, a little loud. Marcus had called ahead. He said he was bringing someone. A friend, he called her, someone he wanted the family to meet. Danielle had smiled at the phone. Of course, she said. There's plenty of food. She had known for 6 months. When the door opened and Marcus stepped inside, the room didn't go quiet all at once. It happened in stages, like a candle being slowly cupped by a hand. First, Dorothy stopped mid-sentence. Then Ronald set down his glass. Then the cousins looked up from their phones. The woman beside Marcus was beautiful in the way that makes a room uncomfortable. She was younger, maybe by 10 years, wearing a cream-colored dress that clung to the unmistakable roundness of a pregnancy well into its 3rd trimester. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders. Her eyes swept the room with a kind of nervous hope, searching for a welcome that wasn't quite there. Marcus cleared his throat. His voice came out too loud, the way voices do when someone is trying to sound natural and failing. Everyone, this is Serena. She's important to me. I wanted you all to know. He didn't say the word. He didn't have to. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Dorothy's hand pressed flat against the table. Ronald looked at his son with an expression that was equal parts grief and disbelief. The cousins exchanged glances. The aunt stared at her plate. And Danielle looked up from the end of the table, calm as still water, and said, "Welcome, Serena. Please sit down." Serena hesitated. She looked at Marcus. He was watching Danielle with wide eyes, his wine glass hanging loosely from one hand, his jaw tight. He had expected something, tears maybe, or a scene. He had braced himself for it on the drive over, had even rehearsed what he would say if Danielle raised her voice. He had not prepared for this. Danielle rose from her seat slowly, smoothing the front of her blouse. She walked to the kitchen without hurrying, as if she were simply going to check on the roast. The family sat in frozen silence. Serena lowered herself into an empty chair near the middle of the table, her hands folded over her belly, her eyes down. When Danielle came back, she was not carrying food. She was carrying a folder, white, plain, the kind you buy at any office supply store. She walked to where Marcus was still standing, near the doorway, and set it on the table in front of him. Gently. No anger in her hands. No trembling. "I was going to wait until after dinner," she said quietly, "but I think now is probably the right time." Marcus stared at the folder. He didn't touch it. "Go ahead," Danielle said. "Open it." He did. Inside were papers. Legal papers. Clean, precise, already signed on her end, dated 3 weeks prior. Divorce papers, yes. But also something else. A full financial separation agreement, a property division outline, and a document transferring the deed of the house entirely into Danielle's name. The house Marcus had always called their house. The house he had assumed, somewhere in the back of his mind, he could always come back to. His face changed. The color drained from it slowly, then came rushing back in patches. He looked up at Danielle. She was watching him the way a person watches a storm from behind a window. Present, aware, but no longer in danger. "You knew?" he said. It wasn't a question. "For a while," she answered. "How long?" She didn't answer that. Instead, she looked around the table at the family that had become hers over 11 years of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and small ordinary moments that added up to a life. She looked at Dorothy, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. At Ronald, who had his hands clasped together like a man in prayer. At the cousins, who were young enough to be confused and old enough to understand. "I'm sorry you had to be here for this," Danielle said to all of them. "I'm sorry it happened this way." Dorothy stood up. She walked around the table slowly and put her arms around Danielle without saying a word. It was the kind of hug that doesn't need language. Danielle closed her eyes and breathed in once, steadily, and held herself together, the way she had been holding herself together for 6 months. Marcus was still standing by the table when Danielle stepped back. Serena had not moved. She sat very still, one hand on her belly, her face unreadable. Whatever she had imagined this evening would look like, it had not looked like this. "The papers have already been reviewed by my attorney," Danielle told Marcus. "You can have your lawyer look them over. I think you'll find they're fair." She picked up her wine glass from the table and moved back to her seat. The roast timer beeped from the kitchen. "Now," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I made enough food for everyone. And whatever else is happening tonight, I'm not going to let it go to waste." It was not a perfect ending. Real life rarely offers those. Marcus signed the papers 3 weeks later, in a lawyer's office downtown, with a pen that didn't belong to either of them. Serena had her baby, a girl, in the spring. Danielle sold the house the following autumn and bought a smaller place on the east side of town, one with a garden she had always wanted. Dorothy called every Sunday. That part didn't change. What people who knew Danielle remembered, when they thought back on that evening, was not the drama of it. It was not the shock on Marcus's face or the silence that fell over the room when he opened that folder. What they remembered was how she had stayed at the table, how she had served the food, how she had looked at the people she loved and decided, in that quiet and deliberate way of hers, that she was not going to shrink. She had prepared for that dinner the way she prepared for everything, carefully, thoroughly, and entirely on her own terms. And when it was over, she cleared the plates, washed the glasses, and turned off the kitchen light. She had done what needed to be done, and she was ready at last for what came next.